It's Friday, and I'm back with the next in our Fanzine Friday series. Today we're taking a look at the Doombook of Chaos, number 9. Please stick around. I'm AZ Mountaineer, and this is our channel, Old School Rules, where we celebrate the community of old school gamers and grognards who like classic RPGs, miniatures, magazines, and everything that goes with it. Each week on the Fanzine Friday series, I take a fanzine from my collection off the shelf for a closer look. Today we're looking at the Doombook of Chaos, number 9. This is from the fall of 1984. Hope you enjoyed the video. So if you've been watching the Fanzine Friday videos the last couple of weeks, you know I found a couple of extra issues of the Doombook of Chaos. A while back I looked at issues 1 through 6. I found number 7. I'm missing number 8. And now we're looking at number 9. This is the size we're used to. It's a heavy stock blue cover, a paper folded in half and stapled through the middle. So changes are afoot at the Doombook of Chaos. You may remember that originally Brad Bennett was sort of organizing this, and his friend John Grandidge was helping, and then he took over in issue 7. And now in issue 9, Irwin, he was the third person who never seemed to be quite as involved, let's say, right? He stepped up and taken over. So. And it feels like the first two guys are really sort of out of it and leaving it up to him to get this done. He does this issue. He says in here that issue 10 is going to be sort of a best of everything that's been in the Doombook of Chaos up to this point. As far as I know, I think issue number 10 is the last issue. And so we just sort of run out of, you know, the organization and the energy. That's the fate of so many of these fanzines. But they got to number 10, which is better, I would say certainly better than average. With what happens with these fanzines. He says, and he mentions this in his editorial, and then he says about the production that they're going to try to go quarterly, and so he says this would be really like the July to September 1984 issue. So this time around we do have some indication of date right there in it. Let's take a look. Here's our cover, Hudson Shaw. I really like Hudson Shaw's art. He's in a few fanzines, and I think is one of my favorite fanzine artists. There's a funness to it, but also I think a really high quality level in terms of his illustrations. This cover, he's got, I don't zoom in a little bit here. I don't know what this creature is. You know, he always has these sort of like animalistic creatures. So he's got like bat wings. I'm not sure what's going on with the face. I can't quite tell what that is supposed to be. Maybe it's some kind of a genie coming out of the bottle at the bottom, right? But in any event, Hudson Shaw art. Let's take a look at our table of contents. We have the editorial, and then a number, we're going to talk about all these things here. Time Trap and Adventure, Horde of Thaumatromic Wonders, which is usually new spells, new magic items. Fables of White Mountain, I think is a new contributor. Doc's View, Analysis of the Dark Crystal, that's the movie. Flying Sorcery of the Tabernacle of the Minotaur Mountain, which is a new adventure. Things from the Crypt, new monsters, and the sun is out. A little article about you. And some charts for weather. As I mentioned in terms of contributors, Irwin is in charge. I left John and Brad's name on here, but it's not clear to me that they're really involved anymore. And then the rest of these folks, Richard Lee, Geoff Cordery, Malcom Edge, G.C. Stratmann, John Bracewell, all make contributions. Of course, Hudson Shaw, not only does he do art in a few places here, he also does the Minotaur Mountain adventure. So let's take a look. Here's our editorial and their table of contents with some art at the bottom. I think the skull looks to me like it's Hudson Shaw. It's not signed or initialed. And then Lee, I think, has done this little whip or squiggly thing, whatever it is. So he gives you a little bit of, you know, again, he's giving you a little bit of the history. He says these guys have sort of departed, or at least he's inherited responsibility for it. He's encouraging people to make, to make contributions. It seems like many of the regular contributors, I don't know if there was some time lapse here as well, but many of the regular contributors seem to no longer be sending things in, or at least they hadn't for issue number 9. Okay, the first thing I want to talk about is this adventure, Time Trap, Geoff Cordery, and this is a Dungeons and Dragons adventure. It says 6th, 5th level characters, more or less, is what it is tuned to. It's interesting. It's kind of quirky. So here's the background. The players begin the adventure at a fortified town of Morgue. I think that's how we would say that, on the coast that overlooks an island of Tyrion. On the coast, it's evident that the town serves very little use as a port. I always think of it as maybe up on cliffs or something like that. But its sustenance is based on trade with the island. And one of the things they mentioned to you sort of randomly, it'll make sense later, is that the eggs here are really large. All the eggs are very large. Apparently they don't have any chickens in this town. He wants the players to learn about the trade and about the eggs randomly, but he says, but you kind of have to push and make sure they figure it out sooner or later. For example, his example is if someone says they want breakfast, they said, well, basically we have eggs. And if you try to get that for a player, they'll be like, that's too much, because the egg will come out and be about 4 feet around, like the size of a platter. And they also, you'll learn that something has gone on, like the trade has stopped, and they're going to, sort of worried, like, hey, the egg deliveries haven't been happening in the past couple of weeks. What's going on? And so eventually there will be, you have to make a way for this wizardly-looking old man to come over and talk to you. And what you learn is that there are these Time Lords, and here's a drawing of the Time Lord, which is this alien-like creature, and they can both find and sometimes create these sort of like space-time continuum wormholes, let's call them, right? And so you're going to go through one, and it's going to take you to the island, but it's going to take you to the island at a different point in time, as I understand it. And so here's this little wilderness map of the island. You go around, and so the two things you're going to figure out, and I guess broad brush themes are this: there are dinosaurs on this island. That's where the eggs come from. That's that they trade, and that there is in the far past where you've been transported to, there's a magician that's gone through a time warp and come to this distant past, and he's taught the primitive people there things like language and reading and writing and magic, given them weapons and so forth to help them survive and help them deal with the dinosaurs and so forth. And so when you go in the past, he has just died, and they've built a pyramid for him. So you can go to that pyramid, and here's what I like about it. That's thoughtful, is the pyramid may present some danger, and the characters could, in theory, decide not to go in. They could go, and you can find your way back through this time warp to get back to your time and place, right? So you could go in and fight your way through or adventure through the pyramid. You could also make the decision, let's go back to the time warp. Now you know that pyramid's there. Go back in your own time. Hundreds of years have passed, and it'll be overgrown, and maybe it's better. And he very thoughtfully in here tells you in many of the rooms, if you go through in the past, here's what you're going to find. But if you go back to sort of the character's timeline, hundreds of years later, here's what happens. So that maybe there's an automaton, right? An iron golem or a moving statue, and immediately it's going to work really well. Years go by, maybe it's rusty. Maybe the doors are corroded. Maybe, there's a living creature in there that becomes an undead creature. I'd say probably about half the rooms have something different depending on which timeline you decide to go into the pyramid. Your characters may never even think about that. They may, when they go to the past, they may just go through the pyramid. But in any event, I thought that was a very clever thing to think about, and I like the way he did the different things that happen over time. And here's the map of the pyramid. Okay, next, this is Des Irwin. He always did this little tiny article, The Hoard of Thaumaturgic Wonders, and he has his new magic item. It's called the Eye of Eldamir. It's an odd one. He put the eye in his friend's forehead because his friend was blind and mute, but this enchanted stone on a band allowed them to communicate, sort of like telepathically, allowed him to see whatever his friend could see. Then his friend dies, and he takes it back and makes it into a ring, and then it becomes lost to history. But obviously, if we're reading about it, that's because your character must have found it. And it basically, you can, wherever the ring, you have to wear it for a little while and it'll sort of bond to you. And then wherever you put the ring, you can see through the faucet or the top of the gem. So you could put it in someone's forehead, like a GoPro cam. You could put it on someone's hand and maybe see the ring moved around. It's a clever scrying device. I'm not sure how you figured out how to use that well in your campaign, but it's interesting. Malcom Edge is, unless he was in issue 8, he seems to be a first-time contributor, and he writes a little bit about wargaming and about how he was introduced to Dungeons and Dragons. And I think this is also part of his, down here at the bottom, he talks about people in the wargaming community at this point were still complaining about role players and how they're siphoning off all the young people into fantasy role-playing games. He gives some thoughts about, the difference between the excitement of being a hero and being, your own character in a role-playing game versus trying to replay, these ancient historic battles, which as more and more time goes on, people know less and less about. Maybe you're less and less interested in learning about. And then he also mentions a new war game that he's been playing called Starfleet, which he liked quite a bit. So next we have Doc's Views, and he gives us a review of Car Wars expansion set and another product for Car Wars. He didn't like the expansion set, thought it was kind of cheap, but for all the same reasons, he liked Sunday Drivers because he thought it was really well done and well executed. And that review is done by G.C. Stratmann. It's not clear who's done the review here of the movie The Dark Crystal. Remember that movie, and if you haven't seen it, I recommend. Remember, this is a fantasy movie that was done with Jim Henson. And so all these creatures, right, this isn't animation, and it's not CGI. He does puppets like the Muppets, Sesame Street, and so forth. And so it's an interesting attempt at fantasy, and I thought it was pretty well received. I remember watching it back in the day. Next, we have something called Flying Sorcery, which is an idea. Oh, I see there. It says Hudson Shaw did that review. Flying Sorcery is an opportunity for someone who doesn't want to write a full article. They just have an idea. And so John Bracewell has contributed the Staff of Defense. I like this. It's a magic item. It's for magic users. Its primary purpose is essentially it's a enchanted staff that will parry. And so you can announce at the beginning of the turn when you declare your actions, I want to use my staff, and it won't help you from a spell, but it will deflect either a missile weapon or a melee attack. So pretty good for a magic user, especially if they found themselves in melee combat. They'd want to whip this thing out and protect themselves. They don't make the basic ability to use a charge. That, I don't know how I feel about that, because you're basically like invincible, right? Because you're blocking everything. But they do give it some other abilities. It's that use charge. It's armor class 2 against hand-thrown weapons, armor class 3 against propelled missiles. So I don't know, maybe that's what they mean, is it doesn't actually prevent it, it just lowers your armor class. You can use it to cast a sanctuary spell, a fire shield, or a wall of force, and those things all use charges. And if you attack with it, it's basically attacks as an enchanted +1 weapon. Now, here's the nice balance to it, is every time you get attacked and you defend, the item has to make a saving throw, and against a crushing blow, and it's possible that it will break. So maybe that's okay that it doesn't use charges, because it is sort of at risk of being destroyed every time you try to use it. The next thing that they have here is a new monster by Geoff Cordery called the Duppy, and the Duppy is essentially a ghost that's been called up in, this is from the West Indian area, so that's where the myth comes from. You put some rum and some spices or some gold on the ground, and gold dust on the ground, and you can call up this relative. It has to be a relative, and you have a percentage chance to basically ask them to go do some type of a quest, small quest for you. Maybe go find something, learn something, bring back a lost item, something like that. But there's also a risk that it will either be angry or that you'll accidentally call the wrong spirit up, in which case you get attacked. It's okay. It's basically just an undead creature with a slight flair to it. Of the Tabernacle, and so we've got a little bit of something from the Tome of Tartarus, and this is he starts with this little description. He says it's from there about the birth of this dragon, and he talks a little bit about dragons and how he says dragons shouldn't just be hanging out in random dungeons. He said you need to make your dragons a much bigger deal. Give them a cool name, some cool story. People should be freaked out and scared. It's the kind of thing they should be hearing about, maybe more than confronting. And so he really likes to make his dragons have some intense backstory and be really fearsome creatures that player characters will do their best to avoid, if at all possible. He also said he doesn't do the strict, red, green, blue, white black dragons. He comes up with sort of his own thing for his dragon every time, rather than using those colored. But he said basically it's it's still the same skill level, difficulty, and things like that as an older dragon would be. And then he had this idea. He said he took from Richard Lee's comments or contribution in issue 8, which is to share a little bit about a couple of NPCs from his home campaign. I really like this idea of people putting in NPCs, so you can read them. You like some, you not like others. You can just take whatever you want, right? So he's got Bordick, the One Eye, and he talks about his personality, his propensity for certain cursing, and the way he fights. And then Varg Elderbrook, aka the Fox, who's a thief, and just gives you a little bit of color or background about him. I think that's a really helpful thing for DMs to be able to read, much more so than the Rogues Gallery, which gave us however many hundreds stat blocks, but no real, 3D dimensionality to the characters. And so you get that when you just get a few sentences of background. And then there's a little article about opening doors. That's you're supposed to roll every time in a dungeon to try and open it, right? And so he basically explains how he makes sure that the more you try, he'll let you try up to 5 times, the greater the chance you're going to get a wandering monster. Because one whack in a dungeon, who knows what that is, right? But if you pound and then you pound, like something's going to come and check that out. And so he's got a little chart there, the percentage, and it goes up and up and up the more times you try to get the door open. Oh, and then finally, you've got an article here. This is by Des, I'm pretty sure. His philosophy, and he talks about how he likes simple rules. Let's go back here. He likes really simple rules in his campaign. He said, but he doesn't mind having new rules as long as they are easy to understand and they don't take a lot of time to slow down the game. He talks about the economy in his campaign, where he says money is scarce. He said you don't come out of there of a dungeon with like chests overflowing with gold and 5 mules laden down with treasure. He said he makes it a lot harder. You really have to scrimp and save and be glad you got 20 gold pieces and now you can go buy a dagger or whatever. He said the fact that they have to work harder to get new items, that they can't have everything they want at first or second level, he said he thinks increases the enjoyment of the characters over time. And then the other thing he talks about, which is I think interesting, is his use of guilds. And he said he's designed a system where he uses guilds for all the character classes. And he talks about, like, it's a way to take some money away from the characters, something they have to spend money on. It's a way to give them adventure hooks and ideas or assignments. And it's also a way for them to get certain benefits, like especially if you require training, new skills. Maybe it's where you get your supplies, whether it's thieves' tools or mage gets the ink and the scrolls that he needs to make spell scrolls or whatever it is. I think it's probably a good concept that a lot of DMs could think about and utilize in their campaign. I just think there's a lot of places you could take it and ways you could make that something enjoyable for your players. Minotaur Mountain, it's designed as a Tunnels and Trolls adventure by Hudson Shaw, but as he says, you just have to convert the stat blocks essentially here. It's called Minotaur Mountain. It's a fairly simple campaign. There's a little legend here in the background about this place at the edge of the world, essentially, where you could go. I'm not sure why it's that sort of mystical once I read through it. And essentially, there's lots of Minotaurs in here, and you find things like bull skulls and altars and tapestries and other things that will lead you to understand this was sort of I don't know, he doesn't really say if this is like where Minotaurs were born or what's going on, because there's something really weird where you find a Minotaur who's being tortured, so it's not really clear if Minotaurs are in charge or somebody else has captured all these Minotaurs. And so I kind of give it a kind of rating on that sense, because I don't know what's going on behind the scenes, if you will, right? So as the DM, I'm not really sure where this all goes. And he gives you a staircase down, and he says, you can use that to flesh out whatever's going on your own. So good luck. Things from the Crypt is a new monster, and it's the Green Goblin. And so at first I'm reading it, and he said this is a minor devil. It's the master of goblins, second in their pantheon behind the guy in the Deities and Demigods book. I'm like, okay, okay. And then I realized, oh, he's inspired by the Green Goblin from Spider-Man comic books. So it's a weird blend of that, right? So he's got, like, he can cast Finger of Death. He's got his mithril boomerang and his goblin blade. And I'm like, okay, yeah, whatever. And he talks about how cool the boomerang is because it'll surprise, because obviously he throws it past you and it comes back and hits you from behind. And so it has a chance to surprise, which means you lose your dexterity bonus on your armor class. He gives him some good abilities: detect invisible, detect good, detect magic. And then it goes into, he's got these pumpkin bombs, and I'm like, oh, okay, I get it. And he describes his outfit. He makes him wear the comic book colors, and he gives him this automated with a glider, right, that he can fly on, and it can shoot fireballs occasionally, and then if it crashes, it explodes, and I think it does like some unbelievable amount of damage, like 300 points of damage or something if you're too close to it. You know, it's this catastrophic explosion. So, you know, the artwork's pretty cool down there at the bottom. It just looks like a big fat goblin. The idea had some, it was going okay to me, and it took the hard turn into the comic book land with the throwing pumpkins and the glider. I'd probably back that out. And so the other thing we have here is a piece of artwork from Hudson Shaw. It's sort of a, I don't know, I think that looks like a fish's head turned sideways, but anyway, it's some kind of robot automaton. It doesn't really tie back to anything, but it's just kind of cool. And then there's a trap, and you can see the drawing for it here. You come up through the, whoops, here we go, through this trap door into the hallway. And so when you come up, you'll look up and you'll just see it, it's really dark up there, and you'll see two rails like a train track or a mining cart rails, you know, going up this slope. And when you open the trap door, it sort of sets it. In the trap door, you got to come up with a DM your way to do it, but it's basically, you want to describe it, it's like really heavy when you try to push it up. And so as soon as somebody isn't holding it, it'll shut. Okay, and when it shuts, it'll catch, and so you'd have to break it to get back down through, right? You can't just open it back up. And so here comes the cart. It's released, right? And it comes storming down, gathering speed, and it has this piece of metal in the front with all these spikes. And so it's going to come rolling down the tracks and impale your characters. I think they say it will do, let's look. So, well, it'll take 6 to 24, so that's 6d4 points of damage. When it comes down there, it takes 60 seconds to get down and hit your character, so they're going to have to act fast. One idea it says is the tracks are old and rickety in his idea, and so a combined strength of 30 could sort of like rip one of the rails up, and so that would cause the cart to sort of tilt or roll over, right, or just at least stop its forward momentum so the spikes would not impale you against the wall. And the other thing he points out is you could, in this little area at the very top, you can climb up and get out of the way of where the spikes are going to impale. If like a thief maybe could do that. I'm not sure what other people are going to do. Or, I mean, you got 60 seconds. Maybe you get a really strong character. Maybe he can rip that trap door up and you can all jump down the hole. But it's a very clever trap. Pretty deadly, especially, I mean, obviously it depends on the level of your characters and how many hit points they might have, but it's a good one. Okay, finally there's this article on the weather. I think, again, that's Irwin. You know, and I'm with him, right? Inject some realism. I always try to describe the weather to my characters. He has some ideas, basically have them set off on autumn on this long journey, and even though maybe not a lot happens, you're going to get to the dungeon and go down in. When you come back up, a winter weather will have moved in, right? And so now you've got your treasure, maybe you're worn down, you don't have your spells, maybe stuff's been destroyed or lost inside of there. You got to try to make your way back to the home base through the winter weather. And then he's got charts down here to just randomly determine weather, right? So he's got spring, summer, autumn, winter. You roll to see clear, overcast, rainy, snowy, whether the air's moving, how strong the wind is blowing. We've seen these weather charts in several of the fanzines. It seems to be a pretty common concept that people try to add into the game and share with people their different thoughts about that. And he's even got some ideas about the effects that weather could take on you if you're exposed to them over time. And so here's our rear cover, and he just gives you the information that, you know, basically his mailing address now and how you can still get issues 1 through 8 available, and then just blow up. This is Hudson Shaw's picture. It's a little fuzzy here on the back cover of mine, but it's a Minotaur. It's sort of Orca-Cola instead of Coca-Cola machine. He seems to like drawing Minotaurs a lot. Probably that's why he did the Minotaur Mountain. I should have thought of that. Here's a couple other pieces of Hudson Shaw's artworks. First, we got this signpost. We got a little imp and image of death here. And he says, wish I was unemployed, right? So he's got Afghanistan, Cambodia, Vietnam in the 80s, you know, maybe a little late in time. But anyway, he's just talking about all the wars in the world. And then here's just this little random creature that he drew. I think he's sort of a Birdman, right? But he likes to draw this cartoony humanoid animals. All right, so that's it for the Doombook of Chaos, number 9. Hope you guys are enjoying the fanzines on my channel. I hope you're subscribed, and if you've got friends who join the content, I hope they'll be subscribed as well. As I mentioned, I'm missing number 8 and 10, so the search continues for those. But next week we'll be looking at a new fanzine. I got to figure out where I'm going to go next, what we're going to take a look at. So we'll try to get those out, and we'll see you guys next week. Hope you have a great weekend. Until next time, my friends, keep rolling 20s.